Hello, I am Bhante Pamutto, and today I am with the Indonesian Buddhist family in Queens, New York, at the Vihara Parivara Dhamma Acala. And today I'd like to offer a reflection, and it's a reflection about a very important quality of mind in the Buddhist teachings, and this quality is called upeka. And we often translate this to be equanimity. And equanimity is a very unusual word in English. It's not the most common word. We don't use it in everyday language. But it's used a lot in the Buddhist teaching. And so it's good to understand this concept and try to get our minds around what it is and why it is so important and how we can cultivate it. Because the qualities that the Buddha points to are not simply qualities that we're either born with or without, but qualities that we can develop in ourselves because they have a useful function to living skillfully and towards fulfilling the goal of the Buddhist teachings, which is to attain Nibbana. So how to understand Upekkha, how to understand equanimity. And I thought of two examples. Suppose you were walking down the street and you came across two strangers and they were in an argument, maybe about something on the front of their house. And one says this should be up and one says this should be over. And they're arguing back and forth. Now imagine if you came across those two people, how would you feel about what they were arguing about? You probably wouldn't feel anything at all. You would just be watching. One person would feel very strongly and the other would feel very strongly, but you would not feel very strongly. And so in that case, you are observing and you are seeing the two people and you are seeing something that is the cause of an argument, but there is no argument in your heart. You're able to just watch, and if somebody asks you, you'd be like, okay, well, I think a little higher might be better, or over is not so bad, but you wouldn't feel personally invested. And that means you have a balanced perspective, and that means you are equanimous, you have equanimity or upekkha. Or another example might be if you were to eat a really big, good meal with your family, and then you were going to go to the market, to the grocery store. And normally, if you were hungry and you went through the grocery store, you'd be like, oh, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. Oh, and if I get this, I can make that for dinner tomorrow. But if you go right after you've had a really big meal and you're totally satisfied, then you will look at all the food on the shelves and you will say, oh, I don't need that, I don't need that. I guess I could get a carton of milk for tomorrow. But you won't feel greed. You won't feel a real wanting for everything. You'll pick up a box of something and you can just look at it and your heart won't be troubled, because you're not hungry. It's very simple like that. So you would be equanimous towards all the food in the grocery store. And so these are two ways of seeing equanimity. It's when our heart is balanced. And our heart is naturally balanced when greed, hatred, and delusion are not present in it. So that is a state the Buddha points to. And equanimity, or upekkha, comes up in two very important lists of qualities that the Buddha gives. And one is in the 7 factors of enlightenment. And this is a list of qualities the Buddha gives that is about our personal development. So when we begin applying mindfulness and investigating the Dhamma and joy arises, our heart becomes calm and our mind becomes concentrated. And upekkha is right at the very top of this list. When all of the other 6 factors of enlightenment have come to fulfillment, then upekkha starts to come to fulfillment. So this is how we can see upekkha in our meditation practice. And it's not necessarily there in the beginning in this list. It's something that has to be developed. So there are times when we might think we're equanimous or we're balanced, And really, we're in the opposite of equanimity. The opposite of equanimity is to not care or to be apathetic. And this is not actual equanimity, because there are times when we simply don't care. Like, say we were walking down the street and we saw two people arguing, and we're just like, well, I don't want anything to do with that. And we just go to the other side of the street and keep walking. This would not be equanimity, because in fact we didn't want to be part of that. And at first, our minds, if there is no mindfulness, if there's no energy, if there's no investigation, if there's no joy, then our mind is really not ready to be equanimous. It's not fully engaged with the things that it's seeing. And so upeka, in terms of our personal development, requires all of these factors to kind of build up. But when it does build up, as in meditation, we can know that equanimity is the fulfillment of the factors of enlightenment. When our heart is full and energized, and when we are mindful and curious about the Dhamma, then having equanimity is a very powerful state to allow us to investigate the Buddha's teachings. We might see a teaching like the Four Noble Truths, and we might say, there is suffering. The First Noble Truth, what could that mean? It doesn't. I don't think it's right. I'm not suffering. People in Africa, they might be suffering, or people in a famine, they might be suffering, but I have things pretty good. But when we have some equanimity in the heart, it's balanced. And it can just look at things as they are. And it says, okay, yeah, I don't have really strong suffering, but I wake up in the morning and I have hunger, and I get sick, and I'm getting older, and people argue with me. And we start to investigate the Buddhist teachings. And when we have equanimity in our heart, we're actually willing to look. It's not apathy, because we're ready to face the reality of the world around us, and we're willing to look at it. And so equanimity is that ability to say, oh, okay, no, I see what the Buddha is talking about. We don't shy away from things, even really scary things, like aging and sickness and death, or the loss of things that we really love. This is part of the Buddha's teachings, and he's pointing out that this is going to happen sooner or later. And if we don't have equanimity in the heart, then when that happens, we will cry, and we will suffer, and we will be miserable. So a lot of the times, suffering is quite small, but there are times when it's a lot. And our ability to be okay in those times is based on the balance in our heart. And that is what the Buddha calls equanimity. This same quality of heart shows up in another place, in the Brahma Viharas. Now, Brahma Vihara means the divine abodes. The divine abodes are called this because it is said that the Brahma gods who dwell in heavens, they don't necessarily need to have bodies, and they have very powerful minds. And it's called a divine abode because it's said that rather than dwelling in a body or in a physical place, the Brahma gods dwell in these mind states. So there are four of them. There's metta, or goodwill. There's karuna, compassion. There is mudita, or joy. And there's upeka, equanimity. Again, in this list, in the Pali Canon, when the Buddha is teaching, he usually puts equanimity at the end of the list. So one way of thinking of this is that we have to start with not having ill will, not having anger or aggression or aversion. So we work on metta and developing a friendly heart, a heart of goodwill, a heart that wishes the best for everyone around us. And then when we're wishing the best for everyone around us, we start to clear out all the senses of cruelty or not caring about the suffering of others, and we develop compassion. And after we start to see that all beings everywhere are suffering and we feel compassion for them, we might start to get rid of any lingering envy or jealousy towards other beings. And this is mudita, a sense of being happy when others overcome their suffering or when they have good fortune. Finally, when the heart is really full and really full of energy and satisfied, we might cultivate equanimity, which is, it's summed up by a phrase that the Buddha repeats often, and it's a phrase about kamma, or actions and the results of actions. And the Buddha says, all beings are the owners of their actions. They are heirs of their actions. They are born of their actions. They are related to their actions, and they will abide in the future supported by their actions. Whatever actions they perform, whether good or bad, of this they will be the heir, which is a formula. The Buddha is basically saying people will get what they deserve. And equanimity is based on this reflection. And as a Brahma Vihara, as a divine abode, it's a very powerful mind state. So the other ones deal with emotions that we're usually quite used to, emotions of friendliness or compassion or joy, just the happiness. Like if you were to see a young child playing with a toy, you might not want to play with that toy, but you can be so happy for them that they're really enjoying themselves. But equanimity is a little bit more describing those moments when we are balanced and we're internally quiet and we're paying attention to the world and we're understanding that everything is as it should be. And this is a very expansive state and a very accepting state of mind. And this is why it's often put at the end of the list. But it's very interesting that in Mahayana Buddhism, equanimity is put at the beginning of the list because the way they look at it, compassion is the most important quality of the heart. And you can't have true compassion unless you are balanced and you're willing to look at things as they actually are. So the reality is that with the Brahma Viharas, all 4 Brahma Viharas exist at the same time. It's just that one becomes more prominent depending on what we're paying attention to and what we've cultivated a lot in the past. So when we have metta, there is some equanimity present. We have to have a balanced viewpoint to be able to wish people well. Otherwise, we'd very quickly get angry when we met somebody new that we hadn't been spreading metta towards. And likewise, when we have equanimity, often we want the best for people just naturally. The difference is that when equanimity is more prominent, then what tends to come first is we don't feel like we have to get involved. We're more likely to wait and to watch and to listen and to just let things play out as they should. And when one has this quality, it's actually very useful in human society. Like there's a lot of talk about metta and friendliness and how good it feels. But it's just as important when people are calm and paying attention. So we might think of somebody like a paramedic, somebody who goes and helps people who've been injured. They have metta. They're very friendly, and they have to have good people skills so that they can approach, and people will be able to trust them. And they have a lot of compassion, or they wouldn't be trying to heal sick people. But also they have to have a lot of equanimity, because if you think of a paramedic going into a very busy situation, what happens when we get injured? If we were to cut our finger, usually we get agitated, we get upset, And when we're upset, we don't make very calm decisions. And so somebody who has equanimity, they go into a situation where everybody else is upset, and they're able to just look at things as they are. They're like, okay, this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen. So equanimity is a powerful trait also for leadership and for ability to understand the dynamics of a group and to help people work through their problems. So it's important for Dhamma teachers and Dhamma practitioners to have equanimity, because that lets us see the Buddha's teachings as it plays out in the world. The Buddha is said to, right before his own enlightenment, first he reflected on his own past lives. So this was equanimity for himself, and this was after he had developed samadhi or meditation to a very high degree. He reflected on his own past lives. But after he had thought back so many past lives to the point that he just got tired, he understood that samsara is without any beginning that can be seen. Then he started to reflect on others. He looked out with upeka at beings as they passed away, and then they were reborn somewhere else based on their karma, based on the result of the things that they had done. And he watched this play out throughout the universe. And as he watched, he started to understand that there was nobody doing this to other people. Like there's no judge up in heaven who says, you go to heaven and you go to hell. The Buddha saw that actually there is simply a universal law, the law of cause and effect. You do this and you get this result. You don't do this and you don't get this result. And that was actually what was controlling everything. And so with equanimity in these two ways, the Buddha could understand everything in the universe, and he could understand how he was one of those beings, moving through life after life after life. And he was able to develop his heart to pierce through his delusion and to accept that that's the way things are. And he was able to let go of the sense that he was in control, let go of the sense that he was some sort of permanent entity in the universe. And this was his profound breakthrough to the Dhamma. And so this is some background about this state of upeka. And we may be wondering, how could I develop this? This is an important state, and there's many different ways of going about developing equanimity. The most obvious one is to practice meditation. So the very first thing when we sit down to meditate is we let go. We have to get into a sitting position or a standing position or a lying down position, and we have to just relax. And so right there, equanimity is at the very beginning of meditation. We have to be able to say, okay, for this block of time, whatever happens, I'm not going to get upset, I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to try to control things. I am sitting down to meditate so that I can observe. And what do I observe? I observe things arising, and I observe things ceasing. In this way, I will come to know the Buddha's teachings. So when we sit down to follow the breath, we're not simply following the breath because it will make us calm, but we're also following the breath because the in-breath and then the out-breath and then the in-breath is just like our life. Things begin and things end, and things are always changing and transitioning. And when we watch, we start to develop an equanimity. We realize we don't have to change anything about the breath. We can just watch the breath, and we understand that if we have a really tense breath, that's because of how we've been using our mind before we sat down in meditation. But the longer we're sitting in meditation, unless we start to feel a lot of pain, then probably our breath is going to relax more and more, because that's the condition we're setting. And the condition for a relaxed breath is an open mind, an energetic mind, and a mind that's paying attention without trying to control things. And that's when the breath really opens up. Another way we might cultivate upekkha is looking out into the world around us. So we can start wherever we are. Right now I'm in the Vihara, and I can start in the forward direction, and I can see a house behind the Vihara out the window, and I can think, there are many beings in that house. And I can think about what they're doing, and I can think they're coming and going, and that one's eating, and that one's going to the bathroom, and that one's sleeping, and that one's watching TV, and I can think about all the beings that might be in there, and I can feel that sense in my heart when I don't feel really invested, but I am interested, I'm curious. Like, oh, that's so interesting, look at people doing what they're doing. And then I can think in this direction, up the street, and I think of all the different people, and I might even look out the window sometimes, and we call this people watching. And people watching is actually developing upekkha, because it's just like meditation. It's just like what the Buddha did, except maybe the Buddha was doing it in a very, very powerful way based on meditation. But we can, even if we don't have psychic powers, we can just look out a window and just see people and animals coming and going. And why are they coming and going? Well, they're coming and going based on kama, based on, sometimes on greed, hatred, and delusion. They're trying to get things. And based on also the fact that they were born. So because they were born, they get hungry, they get tired. Because they were born, they have to work to have a livelihood. And so for all of these reasons, people go about and do what they're going to do. And as we watch, we'll begin to see that. And as we see that, our upeka will start to develop. And I remember a story of a monk who came to a monastery in England. And at the time, the monks in England were wearing these jackets. And this head monk was from Thailand. And everybody in England thought the monk from Thailand was going to come and be very upset because they were wearing the jackets. But they were wearing the jackets because it was cold. And so when the monk from Thailand came, he looked at the jackets and he felt the cold air and he said, "Oh, that's okay. That works too." It wasn't the way that he had practiced. Usually they would wear a simple open shirt called an angsa. But he understood that conditions were different. And so he'd say, "That works too." And then he'd go around the monastery and he'd saw how the monks were doing a lot of work building the monastery because there was nobody else to build the monastery. And he would look and he would say, "Oh, that works too." He hadn't thought of, using the monks to build things, but the monks actually had a lot of free time and energy to help make the monastery a good place to live for many people. And then he saw that the monks were starting to eat breakfast. And in his country, the monks would go alms round, and they would only eat one meal a day. And the monks were very nervous because they thought he would judge them. But then he saw how much they were working, and he saw the conditions were different. And he said, "Oh, that works too, because we're allowed to eat breakfast if that's appropriate." And so the monk kept walking around, and he would see things that people didn't do in his country. And he would just say, "Oh, that works too." And that's the quality of upeka. When we start to expand our mind out into the world, and we withhold our judgments, instead we just want to observe, then this powerful force of upeka starts to develop for us. And we see that the way people do things in America is not the way we might want to do it all the time, but it's okay. We understand why they do things the way they do, and that in this context, that's what works. And then we think about people overseas in Europe, and they do things different, but that's okay too. They're doing things based on tradition, or based on what they like, or based on the fact that they have different conditions. And then we think of all the people in Asia, and why do they do what they do? Well, for the same reasons. Sometimes because of tradition, or sometimes because of different conditions, and that's okay. And so this quality of equanimity is right there to guide the heart and protect it from not just hatred, or not just cruelty, or not just jealousy, but all of those mind states. And this is why it's considered the loftiest of the Brahma Viharas and the highest of the states, the factors of enlightenment. Because when it fully develops, everything else will come to fruition. Because the mind will be stable and it will just watch and it will see the Buddhist teachings as soon as we direct the mind at them. So these are some thoughts, and I hope this has been informative and maybe given some ideas about how one can practice equanimity and how one can talk about equanimity with others. This can be very inspiring for people to remind each other that this was something that the Buddha taught, and equanimity is a good state to have. And so if we're finding ourselves getting really invested in something, or we're realizing that we're really averse to something, and I don't care, I don't want to be part of that, then in both cases, it can really help us to be reminded, oh, this is a good time to practice equanimity, and to look and observe, and that this will be for our benefit for a long time if we can develop this state and bring it to fruition. And so I offer this reflection to you, and may you be well, may you be happy, and may you be able to develop equanimity.